Glues! What's the difference? What's the best one to use? When should you use one over the other? Well, that's what we're going to be discussing in this installment of Woodworking for Beginners. Hi, my name's Jason and I'm a professional woodworker. I've been involved in woodworking in one form or another for over 20 years. I started out building outdoor structures like fences and decks. Eventually I moved into furniture making, and today I'm employed full-time in the historic window restoration business, where I build storm windows and window sash and frames and even a door from time to time. Then in my free time, I'm usually working on my latest obsession, bandsaw boxes, where I'm making simpler designs like this little fellow here, or more esoteric versions like this one here. Little drawer opening right down in there. I recently teamed up with Woodworking for Beginners. They're a really great Facebook community of woodworking enthusiasts where folks can go with questions or to find a solution to a problem that they're having, or even to just show off their latest projects. And now they've started this YouTube channel where there's going to be some really great content from some super talented woodworkers. So make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss a thing. And if you want to see more of what I'm doing, you can find me at jmawoodstudio.com. Alright, so let's get into it. You know, as woodworkers, we're really fortunate to have such a wide variety of really great adhesives for all of our woodworking projects. And each one of these has its own set of strengths and weaknesses. So let's go over each one so you can make an informed decision on your next project. So we've got the three main types of adhesives that you're likely to be using on your projects. We've got good old-fashioned wood glue, we got some epoxy, and then we've got CA glue. There's a few other types out there like polyurethane glue and hide glue and even a veneer glue, but we're just going to be sticking with these three types for this discussion. Now I use all three of these on a regular basis. Frequently I'll use all three on a single project. So how do I choose which one to use and when? Well, it helps to have a basic understanding of their general properties and what their strengths and weaknesses are. So most of you are probably familiar with this brand. At least here in the United States, Titebond has a virtual monopoly on the wood glue market. They're sold everywhere. Big box stores, local hardware stores, woodworking supply shops, all carry Titebond wood glue. And for good reason. The stuff works great and it's relatively inexpensive. I've been using this stuff for years and it's never let me down. It's non-toxic and it just cleans up with soap and water. And so within the Titebond family, they have three main types of glue. There's original, that's frequently referred to as Titebond 1. Then there's Titebond 2 and Titebond 3. So Titebond 1 here is my go-to for just about anything that I'm doing these days. Basically any project that you're going to be using indoors and not getting wet on a regular basis, this stuff's going to be your best bet. And by getting wet, I don't mean a table that might get a drink spilled on it from time to time or wiped down with a damp rag. Now, those kinds of things would still be just fine with this glue. And at about $5 for a bottle this size, this is also the cheapest of the three. Not that price should really be your deciding factor when you're choosing a glue, but this stuff just works and works well. And so next up there's Titebond 2. This one has an increased level of water resistance, and so this is a really great choice for people making cutting boards or just things that might get wet on a more regular basis. And then there's Titebond 3, and this one has the highest level of water resistance. This is the glue that I'm going to be reaching for anytime I'm building something that's going to be used outdoors. Something that's going to be out in the rain and getting soaked for extended periods of time, well, this is the glue that you're going to want to be using. This is the glue that I use in the window business, and it's never let me down. This glue is also just slightly darker in color. It dries to a slightly browner look, and so sometimes I'll actually use this glue when I'm gluing up things like walnut, and it just hides my glue line a little better. Another plus to Titebond 3 is it has the best performance in cold weather. This stuff is good down to 47 degrees. So if you're working in a cold shop like I do, well then that might be something to consider. So all these glues work best when you have really tight-fitting joints and boards that are pressed tightly together with strong clamping pressure. Because these glues are over 50% water, when they dry, they shrink. And so that's why you want really tight-fitting joints and strong clamping pressure whenever you're using traditional wood glues. And so that brings us to one of the downsides of wood glue, is that they just don't fill gaps very well. So if you've got a mortise and tenon joint, and maybe you cut your mortise just a little bit too big, and your tenon is a little loose in there, not that that's ever happened to me, of course, but I've heard that it can happen, and that it can be a real problem, because what some folks might try to do is put a little extra glue in there in the hopes that that's going to tighten things up. But that glue is going to shrink, and you're going to end up with a weak joint. Another sometimes frustrating thing about traditional wood glues is that when they're wet, they actually act as lubricants. And so your boards will go sliding around all over the place as you're trying to tighten your clamps. But if you stick around to the end of the video, I got a tip that could help out with that. And finally, we should talk about the dry time of wood glues. I like to let my projects stay in clamps for a minimum of 8 hours, ideally 12 or more. This isn't usually a big issue for me. I try to work dry times into my workflow. So glue ups are frequently one of the last things I'll do at the end of the day. And so then when I come back the next day, I know that my glue is completely dry and I can pick up where I left off. Still, there are some times when I do wish I could get something a little bit faster. And that brings us to epoxy. Epoxy has all kinds of uses. You can use it as a finish, you can use it to make an entire coffee table. But did you know that you can also use epoxy as an adhesive? It's true, and here's a couple of my favorites. These are System 3's Quick Cure 15 and T88 epoxy. I like these because they're high quality epoxies and they're packaged in quantities that just work out well for me. I'm probably using Quick Cure the most. I use it a lot to assemble the drawers on my bandsaw boxes. It starts to set up after 15 minutes, and then usually after about 30 minutes, it's usually cured enough that I can now pick it up and do whatever other processing that I want to do on those drawers. I also like the fact that when I get a little squeeze out on the insides of my drawers, the cured epoxy really just blends in with whatever finish I'm using. And when I want the strongest bond possible, that's when I reach for the T88. This is a slow cure epoxy that I like to use on my drawer pulls, and I'll usually let that sit for at least 12 hours before I even touch it. One of the other benefits of epoxy is that it doesn't shrink when it cures. Remember that loose mortise and tenon joint that we had earlier? Well, one of the first things that you might want to try to do is glue in a shim to see if that helps tighten things up a little bit. But if that doesn't work, and you really just want to get something in there that's going to help fill any gaps and tighten things up, then epoxy is going to be your best bet. In fact, epoxies really work best when it's allowed to form a slightly thicker film. And so epoxies really work best under light clamping pressure or even no clamping pressure at all. Another advantage to epoxies is that they can have a very long open working time. This T88 will have an open time of 45 minutes. Still others can have an hour or more. That can be beneficial if you have a very complex assembly and you don't want to be stressing over your glue drying up on you. Epoxies are a two-part system. There's a resin and there's a hardener. And to get the very best results, you want to make sure that you get your ratios just right and they're thoroughly mixed. Many times it's a 1-to-1 ratio, which is equal parts resin and hardener. I usually only need small amounts, so I'm usually just dispensing out a little dot of each onto a little piece of cardboard. And I take a moment to make sure each dot is about the same size and then mix thoroughly. If I need a larger amount, then I'll weigh them both out using a digital gram scale. One of the biggest downsides to epoxies is the cost. Both these kits will run you about $25, and so by volume, that's about 10 times the cost of Titebond 1. Another downside is they're considerably more toxic than traditional wood glues. And while they're generally considered safe after curing, it's best to be wearing gloves when you're dealing with liquid epoxy. If you do get it on your skin, it'll still clean up with soap and water, but you're probably going to want to use a more aggressive soap like Gojo or maybe even dishwashing detergent. And if you get epoxy on your woodworking projects where you would really rather not have it, it'll wipe off fairly easily with acetone. All right, and so last up is CA glue. And so first off, CA glue is what the rest of the world calls super glue. I guess woodworkers just like to call it CA glue because we think it sounds cooler. The CA part stands for cyanoacrylate, and when it's used in conjunction with an accelerator, it cures almost instantly. This is really great for when you're working on a project and you really just need an instant bond without having to wait for glue to dry. Cured CA glue is easily sandable and it's great for gap filling. It's sometimes sold with a black dye added to it just for that purpose. It's commonly sold in thick, medium, and thin viscosities. Thick is frequently used for filling larger gaps, while medium is good for filling smaller gaps and general bonding. Thin is great for when you want something that'll really dive into a small hairline crack. I'll also use thin CA glue to harden up soft, punky wood that started to decay a little bit. If you're new to CA glue and not sure which one to get, go for the medium. It's the one that I'm reaching for most often, and I always have some around in the shop. CA glue will cure without an accelerator, but for me, the whole point of using CA glue is that instant bond, and so a can of accelerator is something else that I just always have around the shop. CA glue is definitely on the expensive side. A small bottle like this will run you about $12, and a can of accelerator will run you about $16. Another downside to CA glue is that it will bond to your skin almost instantly. Gluing your fingers together is almost a bit of a rite of passage for anyone who regularly uses this stuff. If you do glue your fingers together, don't panic. They will come apart, but you have to work very slowly to work them apart. Otherwise, you risk tearing your skin. Acetone will help a little bit, but you still need to work really slowly. Another issue people will frequently have with CA glue is it will build up on the tip here. You'll get a lot of buildup of glue around here, and then your cap no longer fits on tightly. And so one thing I like to do is every time I'm done using it, I'll try to wipe off the tip using a tissue or a little piece of paper towel, and that'll help keep buildup from forming on the tip. But for me, the biggest drawback to CA glue is that it just doesn't provide the same strong, durable bond that you get with either wood glue or epoxy. When CA glue cures, it cures so hard that it actually becomes brittle. A sharp blow can actually cause a CA glue bond to break. I'm not saying that it can't be used as an adhesive in woodworking projects, but I am saying that if you want a strong, permanent bond that's going to last for decades, then either traditional wood glue or epoxy is going to be a much better choice. So how can I combine instant holding power with a long-lasting permanent bond? Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because I got a little demo showing how I do just that.
So here I am just gluing on the back one of my bandsaw boxes, just because that's the project that I've got going on right now. But you can use the same technique for all sorts of gluing situations. So here I am just kind of spreading some Titebond Wood around with my favorite glue spreader. You'll see that I'm leaving a little bit of space up there at the top. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to go up there with a little bit of CA glue. And what that's going to do for me is that's going to hold that board in nice and straight the way I want it. I really want it flush at the bottom. And so that's going to give me just enough holding power so that when I go and put it into clamps, that the board doesn't go sliding all over the place on me. So I just go up there with a little bit of CA glue, and then I'll line my board up just the way I want it, and then I'll just hit the top there with some activator and just give it a chance to seep down into there. And that's going to give me just enough holding power that's going to hold everything nice and straight. Alright, and here I am just gluing up one of my drawers, and only in this case I've got a little epoxy mixed up, but then I'm leaving just a little space on each side there, and really just doing the same trick with my CA glue. And then once I get everything lined up the way I want it, I just hit it with that CA glue, And that's going to hold everything really nicely in place, and then also allows me to flip it over right away so I can glue up the other side. And so now I'm just going to do the exact same process here, and that's going to hold everything nicely in place while that epoxy cures. So there we go.
Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end. I hope you feel a little bit more informed about the use of all those adhesives. And if you want to learn more about bandsaw boxes and some of the techniques that I've developed in making them, I have a 90-minute video course detailing all the steps that I use to make this box here. It comes with 2 sets of templates, one of the original and one with easier curves for new bandsaw users. It's all on my website, jmawoodstudio.com. And just for Woodworking for Beginners members, I have a 10% discount code. Just enter WW4B into the discount section at checkout to get your 10% discount. Hey, thanks again, and be sure to hit subscribe to see more great content, and I'll see you on the next one.